They say confession's good for the soul. And so maybe it's time that I do a little bit of confessing before we do today's sermon. I've done several Bible reading challenges throughout my lifetime. You know what those are, right? That's when somebody gives you this plan and it challenges you to read from cover to cover all the way through the Bible in 1 year. I know I've done those. So that means at some point in my life, I had to read through these 12 books. It's just fact, okay? And I've been attending church now for 50 years, okay? Maybe even just a touch bit on the other side of 50. And somebody may say, yeah, you got a ways to go. I've been here. I know a lot of you have been here a lot longer than me. But in those 50 plus years that I have been coming to church, I am sure there were ministers that preached sermons on these 12 books. But for the life of me, I can't remember a single solitary one of them. So that means either I was doodling on a piece of paper, or maybe I was passing notes with my friends, or maybe I was asleep, or maybe they just weren't that memorable, but I'm sure. And so when I decided to do this sermon series, I'm kind of like, I don't know. Does anybody really care about these books anymore? I mean, they're just these 12 books at the end of the Old Testament. There's so many more fun things to preach on, God. But here we are. And today, we're going to continue our minor prophet study, and we're going to step into what I found to be one of the most raw and honest conversations between man and God in all of Scripture. Found not in a major prophet, so you don't find it with Daniel, or you don't find it with Isaiah or Jeremiah. Instead, you find it in this itty-bitty little short book called Habakkuk. So I made my confession. How many people actually have ever heard of Habakkuk? Okay, there's a few. Cool. How many people have ever read all the way through Habakkuk? Cool, the hands got fewer. Yeah. How many of you regularly go to Habakkuk to learn some spiritual disciplines for your life? Yeah, I get it. I'm there. But when you begin to look at Habakkuk, his message can be actually summarized in one verse. It comes down to Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4. See, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright, but the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. This is the heartbeat of this particular book. It's so important that it's been quoted multiple times in Scripture. Paul quoted it in Romans chapter 1, verse 17. The righteous will live by faith. It was also quoted by the writer of Hebrews in chapter 10. My righteous one will live by faith. And if you really want to drive the point home, just go read the book of Galatians, because this idea of living by faith is wrapped all around the book of Galatians. And so I have to ask the question, what on earth is faith? And when I ask that question about faith, you just have to go skipping. Gary's smiling because in our adult Bible study, they are doing Hebrews downstairs. And here we go. We're skipping right back over to Hebrews because it gives a solid definition. Faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. And as I take that definition and I take just another couple of skips and I go back and I read 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 3, Paul tells us a little bit more about this idea of faith. We remember before our God and Father, your work produced by faith, your labor prompted by love, and your endurance inspired by hope in the Lord Jesus Christ. So I read those two definitions and I come to the conclusion. Faith isn't wishful thinking. Okay? Faith isn't just like, okay, I hope this is going to happen. Or I hope that's going to happen. It isn't just wishing on a star. Faith is something much deeper. It's confident trust in God's character and his promises, especially when we don't understand what he's doing. And that is exactly where our man Habakkuk finds himself today. Habakkuk's name literally means to embrace or to wrestle. And that's kind of a fitting name for this man, because that is exactly what he's going to be doing, because he just doesn't understand God's actions or the lack of actions. He lived in Judah, probably the Jerusalem area, right after the fall of Israel, the northern kingdom. So Assyria has come in. They've confiscated the northern tribes. Those 10 tribes are gone. The 2 tribes are left, and so there they sit. And you know, I would think that after Judah sat there and watched Israel get gone off into captivity, that I would straighten up my act. But it doesn't. See, this puts our man Habakkuk right around the time of Jeremiah. And Judah, instead of going away from the way Israel was doing things, they decided, guess what? We're going to follow in their footsteps. So as Habakkuk comes online here, things are falling apart. Judah was now in spiritual decline, moral corruption, and everything was politically unstable. It was supposed to be God's country. That's a term we get here thrown around a lot these days. Israel and Judah were supposed to combine to be God's country. But they were falling apart. And what is fascinating, in the middle of Habakkuk, he doesn't do what other prophets do. He doesn't go preach. He doesn't stand on a hill and shake his little withered finger from the little old man to say, you bad people. He's not preaching at sinners. Instead, when you read the book of Habakkuk, he decides to turn his eyes toward God and say, God, what are you doing? I mean, the book isn't a sermon. It literally is a conversation. And if we're honest, which we seldom are with ourselves, we've asked that exact same question of God before. What are you doing, God? This whole thing doesn't make any sense to me anymore. So our topic for today is, where's my faith when life falls apart? And like most conversations with God, you know where this has to start. Habakkuk has a complaint. And he wants to ask God, why don't you act? This is what it says in chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. How long must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore, the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem the righteous, so that justice is perverted. I appreciate Habakkuk, because he asked some very point-blank questions, and I'm going to kind of give you some very paraphrases of what he's asking God. He's looking at God in these verses. He says, why aren't you listening? Over and over and over again, I have told you what is going on, and I'm telling you that there are problems in this world. Why aren't you listening anymore? Why aren't you doing something, God? Look around. It's a mess. It's a catastrophe. Nothing's going the way. God, you should be down here taking care of this. Why aren't you doing something? I know why you're not doing something. Can't you see what's happening? Don't you look around? This is your creation. You're the one that made this. How come you aren't looking? How come you can't see what I see? And then the big question. How can you possibly think that what I see out in the world today is okay, God? He looks at Judah, God's people, and he sees violence, corruption, injustice, moral decay. And I didn't have a hard time coming up with a headline today. Nation in crisis. Violence increasing. Law ignored. justice perverted, wicked people thriving, while the righteous suffer. Yeah, I did not pull that from a newspaper of today. That is actually a made-up headline, but it would sure fit in our world today. Because maybe you've looked around lately and you see the exact same thing. And you begin to think, God, don't you see what's happening in our schools? Haven't you seen what's going on in our schools, God? God, haven't you tuned in to the networks? Don't you know what's going on in our politics? God, don't you know what's going on in our families? God, have you came and sat in a church lately? Don't you know what's going on in our churches? Where are you, God? In all of the chaos that seems to be taking over the world. This is why I like Habakkuk. He's relatable because he's real. He doesn't sugarcoat his prayers or make things all nice and neat before he goes running to God. He just simply lays it all out. And in his complaint, he got exactly what he wanted. Because guess what happened? God heard his complaint and says, tell you what, I'm going to answer you, Habakkuk. And here is God's answer. I'm acting just not in the way you expect. Habakkuk chapter 1 verse 5 says, look at the nations and watch. Be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days you would not believe, even if I told you. That's a powerful statement from Mr. Habakkuk. Because God says, I am going to do something. And as a matter of fact, you're going to live to see the answer to your prayer. Habakkuk's thinking, oh, goody. Yay. God's going to fix everything, and I'm going to be all happy, and we're going to be out in the street singing praise songs, and things are going to be great. And what God is saying is, I see what you see and more, and I am doing something. In fact, if I told you my plan, you wouldn't believe it. And Habakkuk's kind of leaning in, really, God? Try me. Because God's finally going to fix everything. So God said, okay, here you go. Verse 6. I am raising up the Babylonians. Wait a minute, God. My ears are kind of old. They don't hear as well as they used. You said what? I am raising up the Babylonians. Okay, God, this isn't a good answer. Apparently, you missed the memo. The Babylonians, they were known for being ruthless, violent, arrogant, and completely godless. And God says, yeah, they're my plan. God says, I am going to use them to judge you. Wait a minute, God. That's not the conversation I wanted. That's a plot twist. If you want me to put this in a little context, just for a moment, what if God said, I see the problems in the church today, and I am going to use in your minds, so you get to pick your destruction here. I am going to use a godless government or the most corrupt people that you can possibly think of, and those are the people that is going to judge the church. How would you feel about that? It would be unsettling, would it not? To think about the sin that we see in the world and the people that we see in the world and how they celebrate their sin. And God said, yeah, those people are going to be your judges. I don't think I like that. But sometimes we need to understand. God uses people we don't expect, methods we wouldn't choose to accomplish his will. So get back into the conversation. Habakkuk complains, where are you at, God? Why aren't you doing anything? God says, I am. Let me tell you what I'm going to do. So now it's Habakkuk's turn to respond to what God says, and I absolutely love his little line here. That's not fair. Yeah, you're snickering at that, but that's exactly what he says. Verse 12, Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One will never die. The Lord have appointed them to execute judgment. You are my rock and ordained them to punish. So in his defense, he just doesn't start off whining to God. He throws God a little bit of praise. He looks at God and says, yeah, you're holy, you're sovereign, and you're eternal. I get you're God and I'm not. But then he goes on to say, how can you use a nation that's even more wicked than the nation that I'm living in? Verse 13, your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? He even steps out on an island. He said, God, let me make sure you understand how this goes. I'm going to give you a metaphor. Basically, I'm going to tell you a story to help you understand who Babylon is because you missed. He compares them to a fisherman using a net, dragging in the nations one by one, praising the net, not God. They weren't conquering the world because they wanted to praise God. They were conquering the world because they wanted to conquer the world. So Habakkuk is now standing there with his complaint, and Habakkuk is now standing there with his answer, and now he's standing there with his another complaint, and when we boil it all down and we strip it all away, we begin to understand what Habakkuk's issues are. Habakkuk doesn't want God to act. He wants God to act in a way that he thinks is right. Ponder that thought for a second. Habakkuk doesn't want God to do something. He wants God to do the something that he thinks is the right something to be done. Therefore, Habakkuk wants to be God. Habakkuk wants to lay out how things are supposed to work. Habakkuk is trying to tell God, this is how you fix the world, God, in our modern times, which was probably quite a few thousand years before we call this our modern times. And I have to ask, are we home yet? Isn't that us? Don't we do the exact same thing to God? And God says, hey, this is how it's going to be done. And we look at God and say, that ain't the way the world works anymore, God. This is the 21st century. The world doesn't work this way anymore. And so you need to get with the program, God, and this is how you're supposed to do it. And in that, we begin to tell God how he's supposed to fix the problem. And in our fix, it's really kind of simple. In our fix, we want God to bring justice, but only on them, not us. Okay? God, you go fix them, and whoever the them is the them that's not me. You go fix them and just leave me alone. Isn't Habakkuk the one that was just complaining about God's people not having about the same morality as the world? But now he doesn't want God to fix that. He's like, you missed the plan. We want God to make people behave on our terms. How many times has the church tried to legislate morality? Let me ask you something. How many times has it worked? I can answer that one. 0. You know why? You can't legislate morality. I can't pass laws to make people moral. I can pass laws to punish people if they don't act in the way that I think is moral, but you cannot make somebody moral just by passing a bunch of laws. It can't be done. But that's what we try, right? God, what they're doing is sin. I know. Have you thought about what you're doing might be sin also? Well, we're not talking about God. We're talking about them, not me. Yeah, isn't that how we do our life? We want mercy for ourselves, but judgment for others. Okay, God, you got to cut me a break because look at my past, look at my history, look at how much I've tried to do for you. So you owe me some mercy. But those people out there, they deserve nothing. They don't deserve 1 ounce of your mercy because they aren't doing things as good as I try to do them. Do you really want to start playing that game with God? Do you? You want to start trying to compare resumes to see who's in and out? Do you? I don't think so, because guess what I'm going to find out? There's a lot more resumes out there that they look at me and say, yeah, Barry, you don't live a very righteous life. Tell me about it. You're not telling me anything I don't already know, all right? But I'm not comparing resumes. I'm not asking for God to pass judgment because those people, we're going to talk about it next week, they've already been judged. You see, Habakkuk is wrestling. Only now, it just got personal. Because now God is going to take his country and invade his country and take Judah off into captivity by these godless pagans who can't even seem to figure out how to come to church on Sunday. Really? Yeah. And so he takes this complaint to God, and God in his mercy decides, let's continue the conversation. I'm going to answer you again. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be very blunt with you, Habakkuk. In your personal struggle, here is what God says. Live by faith. The Lord replied, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so the herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits the appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. See, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright, but the righteous person will live by faithfulness. So God looks at Habakkuk and says, get out your pen and start a writing, because I'm only going to say this once. You better write it down plainly, clearly, legibly, because here's the message. The plan I just told you about will happen. It will happen on my timeline, not yours, Habakkuk. You may not understand my ways, but I am calling you to live by faith. In short, Habakkuk, I'm not going to give you an answer. You're just going to have to trust me. Trust me that I'm going to take care of Babylon. Trust me, I'm going to take care of Judah. You, Habakkuk, you worry about just living by faith in the middle of the chaos that I'm about to create. I don't think I like that answer, do you? I think I'd rather God just raise up a really good person to come and lead my country and pass a bunch of laws and fix all of the problems. That way I can come in church and make things all good. I don't want the idea that somebody's going to come and take my freedom. And I don't like the idea that there's going to be persecution. And I don't like the idea that God's going to cause me stress. And I certainly don't like the fact that he's going to ask me to live and trust him in the middle of all of it. But it's the message that we need today. Folks, we may not be able to fix our nation. And honestly, we've been trying for a long time, and we're not going to be able to solve the political mess that we find ourselves in. Nor are we going to be able to flip a switch and fix all of the moral issues of our day. But you know what we can do? We can be people who trust God, walk in righteousness, and live our lives by faith. That was the message to Habakkuk. So now what does Habakkuk do? I love his next step. It's awesome because as you turn the page in the conversation, he stops complaining and he starts worshiping. He doesn't get the answers he wanted, but he finds something much better. It's called perspective, folks. He writes a prayer, a song of trust. In Habakkuk chapter 13, in chapter 3, verse 19, These are the words from his song. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of deer. He enables me to tread the heights. Did you catch what happened? When he started that complaining conversation, there was nothing but despair. God, my world is broken. God, everything is broken. I'm tired of the headlines that says that the world is broken. I'm tired of seeing sin on display right before me, and there's nothing I can do about it, God. 3 chapters later, he's worshiping God. He starts off with complaints. God, this is your fault. If you had done something about this, this wouldn't be happening to us. Now, he's got confidence. Okay, God, I have no idea why you picked Babylon. I have no idea how this is going to work out. And I'm not really sure I want to be around to see it. But I guess I'm just going to have a little confidence in you. You see, he may not know what the future holds, but he sure does know who holds the future. That's the conclusion he came to. I don't know how this is all going to get fixed. I don't know what it's going to take to make the world change. But I do know who holds the world in his hands. And that would be you. And this is one of the most timeless messages that you could ever get when it comes to how to live by faith. When you can't see God's hand, sometimes you just have to trust his heart. And in that trusting, I want to make sure you understand something. It's okay to ask God questions. Faith is not the absence of questions. Just because you don't understand it all, just because you keep asking God, how do I get this to work the way I want it to go? The questions are fine. He never ridiculed Habakkuk for asking the questions. Even some of them were pretty rude in the way he spoke with God. Faith is trusting God despite them. You can ask the questions, but you're not always going to get the answer that you want. In fact, sometimes the question may get answered by a word that we hate. Wait. Wait. You continue to live by faith and just let me worry about the chaos around you. You focus on your faith and living that faith every day out there in that world that just seems to be going everywhere. It's okay to even wrestle with God. Because sometimes we forget, God's all grown up. He's not some little midget out. He is a great big God. And he is a God that is sovereign. And when his methods surprise, even when his methods surprise and confuse us, he isn't small. His timeline is perfect, even when it feels like it's delayed. Wow. Faith is active. It means trusting, obeying, worshiping, even when I don't understand God. How on earth could you possibly see any good that's left in this world? You need to remember, you are called to live by faith, even when the answers don't come, not just in good times, but in confusing and even chaotic ones also. If Habakkuk could trust God in the face of injustice, national collapse, and uncertainty, then so can we. In a world that is unraveling and at times seems that people are being ruled by nothing more than just fear, maybe driven by their opinions, shaken by circumstances, we must live by faith. Faith that doesn't just survive the chaos. Faith that shines in the chaos. We must become the light in the darkness. Because that is what will actually save the world. One light at a time.